How's that for listener engagement?
I think we are set. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Dan Maloney. I'm a staff writer at Hackaday.com and community engineer at Hackaday.io.
This is episode 191. This week, researchers parse Starlink, switches sense muscles, and LFT plays the Commodordion. I live in Germany. I'm bringing you guys some news from Europe this week. The first up is a really neat hack, actually, coming out of a Chaos Computer Club member, Flipke. Let's see, needs a little backstory. Patient data files in like hospitals and doctors' practices here in Germany are encrypted and transferable. They have this big interoperability system. Part of this is that they all have a tightly controlled encryption standard, and in particular, doctors' practices have these devices that then have to plug into specialized connectors. Specialized connectors in question have a smart chip in them that contains the cryptographic keys and does the encryption. The keys in these smart connectors had an expiry date that's coming up soon, I think August 2023 or something, and so the question was what to do. A big industry group got together and the four companies that make the connectors convinced an industry oversight group that they needed to trade the connectors out and they couldn't software update the security keys in them. Enter Flipke, who shows that there's a quite simple patch after a lot of very clever reverse engineering that makes the whole thing completely software updatable. And so basically this huge, hundreds of millions of dollars swap out of these like custom cryptographic connectors could be done as a simple matter of software, saving, average doctor practices like $8,000 or something like that.
Well, I think the cool thing for me is thanks to Google Translate, I just realized that Gesundheit means health or healthcare because that's because that's how Gesundheit System 400 translated anyway.
Right?
So now I know.
This is just a rad public service hack, and I think the industry group had previously tried to suggest that it would be, impossible to do this without selling tremendous, $400 million worth of new cables to doctors. And within a week, I think, of even taking on the project, Flipke completely busted it open. So that's pretty cool just by itself.
It's a healthcare computer hack that doesn't scare you because most of them would,
This one actually even shouldn't. It turns out the code on the smart chip that's in the connectors was at least not found out. So it's still the secret key hasn't been given up. The hack here in question is actually just a patch to make the things accept the old key. I think it also needs the sign-off of the German health administration that owns the certificate authority route that these things phone home to. So I think you couldn't do this without national coordination. But the point here is that it looks like the industry making these cables was like, yeah, we want to sell you new ones. And sorry, not software upgradable. And they got caught. Public good hacking always makes my day. The other bit of news I saw this week is that the European Council has approved a new standard to have USB-C be the charger of choice. And this also may mean that you won't necessarily have to get a phone charger with every new cell phone. The idea being that we all have closets full of cell phone chargers and it's creating unnecessary e-waste. Those of you in the States, you may not know, but the reason that you have USB micro on your cell phone to charge it is because that was a European law that they had to. They made some weak exception, actually, for Apple, that they could ship those horrible little adapters that go from the Apple proprietary Thunder Dingus to USB micro. And I don't know what the status of Apple trying to weasel out of USB-C is going to be on this one. We'll see if they can pull it off. Good news. It may be that USB-C will be the next standard phone charger plug.
I'm kind of disappointed that there's not going to be a transformer or wall wart, whatever, in every new phone now. I know I've got a whole bunch somewhere, so I know it's a good idea, but when I need them, they're not there. I can't find them. I don't know where the cables are. I don't know where the transformers are. So maybe keep injecting them into my life so I know I've got one at least handy for the first few minutes of owning a new phone.
Yeah, my problem is I don't have enough USB-C specific chargers, but I can send you like a ton of USB micro chargers if you'd like.
Yeah, try getting those through customs.
Maybe good news for those people who like standardization, but yeah. Oh, and this week we will not be running a What's That Sound because next week I'm going to be off at SuperCon and we wouldn't be able to judge it anyway. Plus, there is the slight hope that I'll be able to pull off a SuperCon What's That Sound. So stay tuned next week and see how that pans out. Oh yeah, and SuperCon's on next week. Does that count as news anymore?
I guess that's news.
I feel like it's all I've been talking about for the past 4 weeks now. So for me, it's no longer news. But yeah, SuperCon's on next week. Come see us. All right, let's start off the hacks. This week, I'll start off with a clickbaity headline, Dan Maloney. When Elon says no, just reverse engineer the Starlink signal. This is it's kind of a hack, actually, by Todd and his team at the University of Texas Austin's Radio Navigation Lab. And this is a really cool kind of academic hack. The idea is that if you knew enough about the Starlink satellite signals, you could use them plus knowledge of where the satellites are, which is public information, to do basically your own GPS kind of thing. I really encourage you to go look at the academic paper here. It's beautifully written and it's really clear, and it explains how they did it. Now, Elon says no. Actually did happen. They first asked permission to get support to try an experiment like this, and I think they're supported by the Army. So, Starlink should have said yes, and they did originally say yes, and then they changed their mind and said, no, we've just got to work on selling our satellite system and not going bankrupt, leaving the Texas researchers high and dry. Non-deterred, they decided they would dissect as much as they could out of the signals that Starlink was beaming back down at Earth. They aren't decrypting any data, but they have pulled the packet structure apart far enough that they can now get very precise timing data out of the satellites. And that, of course, is the key, plus knowing where they are, to figuring out where you are on the face of the Earth. You figure out what time a bunch of different satellites think it is, and you use the speed of light to triangulate, or what do you call it when you do it to 6 different ones? It's locate yourself anyway.
Hexagonate.
Hexagonate yourself on the face of the Earth. This paper answers a bunch of the questions I had. The first one was, why not just try to do this with Dishy McDishface, the user terminals? And they, A, haven't hacked it open yet, but B, think that there may not be the fine-grained timing information in there. The dishies might have a not well-regulated enough clock inside them to be useful for a GPS-like application. Anyway, the paper's all about this really interesting reverse engineering on the system. It uses OFDM, orthogonal frequency
division
multiplexing, which is basically, the orthogonal just means you run multiple carriers at the same time. So if you look at it on a waterfall plot, which you will if you read this article, it's basically a bunch of stripes going down and they contain the data. If you look at them really closely, you can see kind of on-off patterns, and these turn out to be kind of guard times in between packets being sent along each signal. And the group correlates across all of these different carrier frequencies at the same time to help get them more precise timing on where the guard times are and how they line up.
This one kind of confused me, and that's why I picked it up, because I wanted to make sure that I understood it. And right up front, I didn't understand it because, not fully anyways. The paper's really dense. I mean, it's really well written, yes, but it's got a lot of theory in it and a lot of stuff that you just kind of glaze over at.
There's some math that I jumped over too. I'll give that up.
But the thing that perplexed me about this, and because the way I understand GPS, GLONASS, all those systems, is basically each one of those satellites is basically a flying atomic clock. And the precision of the time signal that you're getting allows you to figure out the range to each satellite. And then if you put a bunch of them together, you can figure out your location in 3 dimensions. Without that clock on the satellite, I don't see how it works. But now as I'm talking through it, I think I see that because these are networked satellites that need to know what the time is very precisely themselves, the clocks don't necessarily have to be on them. They just have to have that sense of time. And that sense of time is embedded into those sync and timing signals that is what they ended up decoding from the data structures. I think that's how it works.
I'll buy it.
You buy it? Okay. It's good enough for my needs to understand it at that level. But like you said, that paper's there and it's really well written.
Because there are so many Starlink satellites out there, and because they're in such a low Earth orbit, they're broadcasting exceptionally strong signals down at the Earth. And I think this has led to a lot of Starlink hacks going on, because it's basically a really easy to receive signal, especially in comparison to the GPS satellites. These are significantly stronger signals. And so there's been a lot of work on them lately, and I'm just going to throw a whole bunch in the links section on this one and talk about it real quick. Just a couple months ago, we saw that a researcher from the Technical University Leuven, Leonard Wouters, had gotten his software up on the Starlink ground stations. And so that's like another potential angle toward, if you could run your own firmware on these, maybe you could start to tease apart enough about the signals to do your own GPS with them. We've seen also, even more recently, snooping on Starlink with an RTL SDR, and this one is hilarious. It's basically a junk box. Well, it's a satellite LNB, which is one of these built-in antenna amplifier jobbies. It's the thing you put out on the end of a satellite dish. This is Save It for Parts YouTube channel. He basically just plugs a Raspberry Pi and an RTL SDR into this thing. No dish, just the thing that would sit out at the satellite dish's horn, and points it up, and he's able to see these same beacon signals that Starlink puts out as it goes overhead. And finally, there was another academic attempt to do GPS with Starlink from about a year and a half ago from a group that got kind of 8 to 20 meters accuracy out of Starlink. And I guess I should say that this team at Texas just now got something like 7 meters, I think they were saying. The other group got 8 meters accuracy, not by decoding the signals at all, but just by figuring out where they are by watching the Doppler effect go by. And so they kind of correlated, you know when the satellite is directly overhead by looking at the Doppler shift, and actually you can extrapolate out its position using the rest of it with a whole bunch of brutal math. And so they did that, and that's all out for you to read as well. They have a paper, The First Carrier Phase Tracking and Positioning. I'll put that up for you to read in the show notes as well. So what? Starlink hacking. It's very hot right now, and I think there's going to be a lot more of it soon in the future.
And the more satellites to throw up there, the more opportunities you have, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, it may not be as precise as GPS, but it's an interesting solution if GPS goes down, or if, because these Starlink signals are so much stronger, you can possibly receive them in places where you can't receive GPS.
Some people in the comments were sort of questioning why you bother doing this. And I think that's the answer right there, is that the signal is so much stronger than the tiny little signal that's coming from so much farther away and on regular GPS satellites, that this may be harder to jam. We just had a possible GPS jamming incident in Texas last week.
Yeah.
I think it was last week. I wrote about it in links, and for 2 days there was no GPS coverage at DFW. Well, that's a problem. I mean,
Yep.
it's not the end of the world because, obviously planes have backup methods and there's plenty of ways to, there's other ways to land a plane. But it did shut down a runway for the better part of 2 days. So, if you got a backup and it's up there anyways, you might as well use it. Okay, so my first pick is forearm muscle contraction sensor is useful component for open source prosthetics. When you think of prosthetics, you kind of, at least I do, I kind of think along the lines of an electrically controlled prosthetic, hand, arm, whatever. And the way it would interface to the body, it only makes sense to do some sort of electromyography, where you're putting electrodes on the surface of the skin and doing some digital signal processing. So you pick up the nerve impulses that are intended to activate the muscles that may or may not be there anymore. That's not this. This is much simpler and extremely clever in my opinion. This is TurfTax, who has come up with basically a mechanical sensor. It is electromechanical, but the mechanical part consists of a ring that sort of circles the forearm and a bunch of mechanical plungers, spring-loaded plungers that bear on different aspects of the forearm. It relies on a quirk of our anatomy, which all of the muscles that operate the wrist, the fingers, and a lot of other bits about our hand positions, the hand postures we can get into, all those muscles actually live in the forearm. So when you move your middle finger or your index finger, if you put your hand around, like circle around your forearm, you can feel the muscles moving inside your forearm. So why not sense those? And that's exactly what he's doing here with these plungers. Each plunger is attached to a magnet, little rare earth magnet, and it hovers over a Hall effect sensor that lives just below it. And as the muscle that's right below that plunger moves closer to the Hall effect sensor, maybe a little farther away, and you get a readable signal on that because you can measure the magnetic field pretty precisely. And I think he's got a total of 12 sensors circling the forearm, which gives you a lot of potential degrees of freedom for controlling a prosthetic. I just thought this was really clever and out of the box sort of solution to something that normally seems like it's going to require a lot of sophisticated electronics to process the signals from the nerves, would be subject to, a fair amount of interference, electrical interference. You get into a high RFI sort of situation. Your prosthetic may be doing things that you don't want it to do. With a mechanical system, you really only have to worry about filtering out the mechanical noise, which can be done with the proper selection of a spring. I think he said he actually used the springs from a Cherry mechanical keyboard switch for these plungers. So yeah, just a great sort of rethinking of how we sense biomechanical movement.
Yeah, it's a super clever idea to, use the, whatever it is, the contraction expansion to sense the muscles. I really like that a lot. I saw in the video there's a whole bunch of different sensors and different lines. Is he trying to figure out which muscle group is working as well, or is he just going for some kind of bulk muscle sensing?
I think it looks to me like it's more of a bulk thing. I don't think it can be that fine. Like, I don't think you're going to be able to tell between and I forget the muscle names. It's been a while since anatomy, but I don't think you're going to be able to tell the difference in contraction between this muscle and that muscle that runs the distal phalange of the pinky versus the middle phalange. But I don't think you need that.
I've got my hand around my forearm right now, and I'm I could feel the difference. I'm wiggling my fingers, I'm twisting my wrist. I could feel all sorts of crazy stuff. I wonder, with kind of optimal position, if you could actually read more signal out of this than just, open, close, or tense or not. I guess it would have to stay pretty stable on your arm, but with the right kind of cuff, I guess you could do that too. I don't know. This is just a super clever design, and I totally agree with you. Like, it's somehow kind of a low tech solution, and for that, it's actually really brilliant.
Maybe you only need 3 axes to run a reasonably useful prosthetic, in which case I think you could probably easily do that with this arrangement of sensors.
Next up, fiber laser your way to flexible PCB success. This is a neat research project and demo by the University of Maryland's Small Artifacts Lab. And I like it because this is something you could totally do in the home, at least if you have a high enough powered laser. And that may be the hook here. What they're doing, though, is kirigami with lasers and copper on Kapton. Kirigami is paper folding, and that's kind of what they're doing here. I guess it's a copper gami or kiri copper or kiri Kapton or yeah, exactly. The procedure is to put a thin layer of copper foil, back it with Kapton, and then dial in your diode laser just enough so that you can ablate the copper but leave the Kapton underneath it as a substrate. And that they're doing that at all kind of blew my mind a little bit. And then they will also do a second pass and cut the whole thing out of its Kapton frame by turning the juice up a little bit more and burning through the Kapton. That's kind of cool enough, but where they really started showing off was by turning the power down a little bit more so that it doesn't cut through the copper necessarily, but it heats it up enough, and the differential expansion makes the kind of copper Kapton sandwich fold at the joint where they drew across it with the laser. And they actually they made what, almost looks like an origami crane. They cut the outline, and then they start doing the lower power passes over some of the joints, and the wings and the tail and the head would just kind of curl upwards. It was really sweet looking. They pull off a bunch of other tricks, including reflow soldering with the laser on low. They're just kind of experimenting with what you can do with this simple Kapton tape plus copper substrate and a laser to cut it with. And it's really interesting. And they suggest, then the question is, why would you want to fold these up like this? And they suggest all sorts of things from flex PCB applications, the normal ones where, you need a circuit board to be a little bit springy or you need to bend with your material. They can also make kind of 3D shapes by folding these things up. And because they can come out off the laser mostly folded up already, the final assembly step is pretty easy. You don't have to worry about where to make the score lines. You just close the thing up and hit it with a little glue, and then you can make, for instance, a cube that has the electronics already soldered on the inside of it. Just some really fun experimenting around with a unique material.
Yeah, this seems to me like one of those things that it seems like it's easy to dismiss because, what are you going to use that for? But it's one of those things that when you actually start playing with it, there might actually be some applications that you've never thought of before. And this could be, this could be a game changer for things like that, especially the way it can sort of selectively crease the material like that without, you're basically doing the job of a die and other tooling. Yeah. You're basically reducing to one tool to do multiple operations. That's got to have applications. I'd love to see where this goes, and I'm sure we will. I also love the name of the lab, the Small Artifacts Lab. That sounds really promising. That would really get my attention as a student at the University of Maryland. I'd want to know what was going on in the Small Artifacts Lab.
Yeah, what's really cool here, I guess I said it in the intro, the only part of this that I personally couldn't do at home is a fiber diode laser strong enough to cut through that copper layer. And that's the part that's a bit of a hassle. We've seen some hacker projects using fiber laser heads fairly recently, and I went looking for prices, and it looks like the kind of $3,000 to $5,000 range, which is, too spendy for my uses for this project. But, getting to the point where a hackerspace could pool together and pick one up. So it might be interesting to start experimenting with, laser cut PCB boards in the hacker context pretty soon. And as soon as you do that, then you want to have a look at this video and their documentation, because the way they're doing it is also decidedly low tech. They're really just laminating a piece of copper foil with Kapton. They actually run it through a pasta press to like squeeze them together and get all the bubbles out. And then they punch it with a regular old 2-hole punch to get the registration right. It's a good technique, but it doesn't look like it's an impossible to replicate at home technique. And I really like that about it too.
Yeah, my daughter asked me the other day about laser cutters for metal, and I was like, nah, we won't be able to afford that. That's just not going to happen anytime soon. But if you were going to, I mean, she asked me in the context of wanting to start a small business doing laser cutting.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not that out of range to be able to afford something like that for something that's going to be making money. I mean, if it's just hobbyist use and you want to cut, metal in your workshop, then probably not worth the $3,000 and $5,000 or more. But if you're going to be making money with it, maybe it's not so far out of reach.
Sold. You get me one. I'm ready, man.
Okay.
I'll clear the space out in my basement.
Okay, next up for me, decompiling software to fix an old solar inverter. This is Buy It, Fix It, which I really love the name of that channel. Great attitude to have. What this is a secondhand inverter, a solar inverter that came from one of the usual sources, probably eBay or something like that. Came through broken in electronic terms. There's some things not working about the electronics, but in order to diagnose exactly what was going on, Buy It, Fix It needed to get into some of the admin menus on this thing. Unfortunately, the previous owner had put a password on it. He didn't know what the password was. So after a few phone calls back and forth to the manufacturer, who is no longer the manufacturer because it was sold to someone else, and there was a whole long story about that, we find out, no, we're not going to help you. It's obsolete. You just buy a new one. And that might work for, a solar installer or something like that. And I understand that. The companies don't want to support their equipment forever. They want you to buy new equipment. But Buy It, Fix It was having none of that. Managed to catch a lucky break by finding the old software that used to communicate with this thing from a PC. An installer would use it on a laptop to configure this thing. Managed to find that on the Wayback Machine because it was long gone from the current web, I should say, I guess. And in that package was the installer for this software, which ended up being a .NET program that he was able to take apart with DNSpy, which is a debugger and decompiler for .NET programs, and basically ran it through DNSpy and gets the original .NET code that was used to put this package together. He found a couple of interesting things. Aside from his target of interest, aside from getting to the password, which became sort of almost like a side quest when after finding the Tetris game, and what else was there? There was there were a couple of photos that were
the
encoded
picture
in there.
Of tiramisu.
What? Yeah, that's right, the tiramisu. So all these bizarro Easter eggs that he found in there, just proving that developers often have too much time on their hands when they're facing a deadline. He went into a section of the code that checked the password and was able to take that out, use that as the basis to build his own key generator, and that's basically the hack right there. He's able to generate his own password for it and get into the system again. I just thought it was super clever. And I mean, he did go a little bit beyond that. There was some other low-level functions that he found within the software and things that, normally would not have to bother with as a user, but gave him the keys to the kingdom and was able to get into this thing and finally use it. He also did a repair video on the actual electronic fix, which was interesting as well. So you might want to check that out. The funny thing is the master password was originally a 5-digit number that was the last 5 digits of the manufacturer's old phone number. So just about as lame a password as you could get, but he managed to beat it and get into this thing and start leveraging it instead of e-wasting it.
He puts up this really cheeky response he gives. So first he writes them and says, I need the service password. And they're like, we don't make it anymore. We won't give it to you. And he writes them back. He's like, oh, by the way, I found your password. I fixed the device. Oh, and you have these problems with the devices failing because of a relay and, a rectifier blowing and not thick enough traces here on the circuit board. And he's like, so here you go, free advice to fix your problem. And you probably won't like it. But if you want any of it, look me up on YouTube.
Yeah, that was a good level of troll. I like that.
Yeah. And coming up next, we have a nice explainer by Jay Alamar, how the art generating AI of Stable Diffusion works. And I've been kind of digging into the AI a bit lately because it's been all the rage and I've wanted to run one of these. So I swear, as soon as I get a good graphics card, as soon as the prices become affordable, that's going to be the first thing I'm doing. Anyway, what I really liked about this write-up is that it not only goes into how Stable Diffusion works at a pretty understandable level, more on that in just a sec, it also has some really great images that kind of intuitively show you a little bit about how it works, including, I'm normally kind of allergic to animated GIFs, but there's a superb one that Donald Papp put in our article here, showing you how Stable Diffusion and kind of all these latent diffusion-based image generator models go from basically random noise to an image in question. And it's blinking back and forth in front of my eyes right now. And I can see the outline of what will eventually become these trees in the random noise if I squint at it enough. And that actually is the key to understanding Stable Diffusion and any of these image generators. How they work, the diffusion in question starts with the concept of taking an image and then adding noise to it and eventually degrading it to just pure noise. So pure scatter white noise static. If you could write out the kind of transformation to take the image and turn it into static, and then figure out the inverse function for that, then you could take static and turn it into image. Figuring out that exact function, of course, for all possible pictures and all possible static patterns is, of course, completely impossible. But it's the sort of thing that neural networks are actually pretty good at learning. And that's kind of the intuition behind these diffusion models. They train them on going from image to noise, and then they feed them noise and say, okay, what would the image be that goes along with this? Stable Diffusion doesn't do it in one shot. It actually does it in a whole bunch of steps, like 10 or 20. And so it'll go, here, take the noise out of this image. And then it'll say, oh, you take this noise out. And then they'll take out 1/10 of that. And then they say, okay, we'll do it again. And then, okay, we'll do it again. And so it makes it step through. That's really cool. The other thing that I learned in this explainer is why this class of models are called latent diffusion. So the diffusion is the transition into noise and kind of reversing that function. The latent bit is they actually do it not on the images, but on a compressed representation of the image. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different image encoding and decoding schemes, but instead of doing it on the pixels, they do it on a much smaller piece of data that's, you could think of it as being like a JPEG compression. It's a lot less than the data at each of the pixels. And so that's actually what Stable Diffusion is doing, is they're taking a noised, compressed version and training the neural network model on that, and then basically trying to run it backwards. The last bit is how you get the text to modify what the picture is going to be, and there they have what they call in these models attention, and that basically is their throwing in the output of yet another neural network into these kind of intermediate steps where it's generating a different picture. What you want to think of is they take the image, they encode it, they've got this encoded representation of it, they run this neural network on it each time, telling it what the prompt for the picture was, and running it through the next step. It picks the model that's kind of the most like what you said the text was out of these kind of noisy images that it comes up with. And it just keeps doing this over and over and over again until it gets something that both doesn't look like noise anymore and hopefully looks like the text you've given it, at least in its compressed form, and then they uncompress it and serve you the image up. Anyway, really cool explainer of something that looks like magic, but turns out it's just computer science.
I think the thing that confuses me about this is how each one of these methods seems to have a style that is consistent from image to image. Like I noticed that there's a whole bunch of new videos. I've mentioned them before on the podcast of videos of old songs like, Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song or Black Sabbath's War Pigs or whatever. But all of these seem to have like this consistent image. Now, the feed is supposed to be the lyrics of the song. So you take the actual lyrics of War Pigs and then feed it in, and it's supposed to give you an image that represents that. But then there's this consistent look and feel between images. So like it's not changing styles. So there's got to be something else in there. There's got to be something else that seeds in the style of ... then the AI knows how to do that, knows how to bring that style to the random, the filtering through the random noise that's using as a seed. It's cool. And I really like some of the images that come out. I'm still circling it and trying to get it in my head. I think I need to practice with it. I think I need to actually do some hands-on with it.
Matthew Carlson wrote last month a really nice piece on Stable Diffusion in particular, and makes the claim that why this one of all the image generation ones really matters is that it's open source and it's going to be the most experimented with because people can actually use it. And I think that's 100% true. But then he ran a bunch of images as well. And like you said, they had kind of a common style. And I've looked into that, and there's actually two reasons for that. One is Stable Diffusion in particular, the neural networks in these intermediate steps were trained on a data set called Lion Aesthetics. And so they were trained on a subset of images that were deemed by people to be artistic. And part of this secret sauce of Stable Diffusion is that it doesn't have, random cat pictures coming in. It has artistic cat pictures coming in or great works of art or whatever. And so part of what you're seeing, and we all noticed with some of these, is that, they're like incredibly expressive clouds in the skies. They do this because they're generating these clouds based on the model being trained on tons and tons of like romantic paintings of clouds. And clouds in particular are like a strong feature in a lot of old landscape painting that they would have been easily able to generalize. And that's why you see these like dramatic skies in a lot of these pictures. And that's actually really interesting. The other, of course, is that you can tell it what style you want. And a lot of these people take shortcuts to add things in their prompt, like in the style of something. And there are some popular open fantasy drawing web pages. What's the one that's mostly used? I can't remember. But, they'll say in the style of trending on something. And, then, of course, it knows that it wants you to do something, or you give it these elaborate prompts. You don't just give it, she's climbing a stairway to heaven. You give it, she's climbing the stairway to heaven in the style of something, trending on something, as seen by something with light and photorealistic. And you give it these huge, long, elaborate prompts, and you actually get significantly better results out of it because you're essentially kind of narrowing down the universe of images it's using as its reference.
There was one way to get practice with this, and one of our Hackaday writers has gotten some practice with a particular thing. There is an image now on one article out there that was generated by, what was it, Dolly, I think?
Yeah, I think use Dolly. You don't have to be coy here.
I was gonna say go try to find it. I wasn't gonna give him any hints.
Okay, well then I'm erasing. Undo.
Okay, so there's one image out there where one of the writers, and my only hint's gonna be it's not me, had to adapt a square format image to the banner space we have, the 16:9 banner space, and used DALL-E to sort of generate this image. It was confessed in our pitch meeting the other day, just so we knew that it was there. And I don't think there's a problem with that because it's not misleading in any way. It's not exactly generated. But see if you can find it. Go out there and see if you can find it. It's an article that came out this week, I believe. So no prize if you find it. Just Just bragging rights.
Certainly kudos.
Yeah, and go see if you can see who did the Dolly.
Yeah, so we were talking about this, and the question was, is this deceptive? And the answer, I think, is no, because it's really just filling in the background. And I made the comment that one of our writers, Lewin Day, always puts like starry field backgrounds in when he doesn't have an image that fits the rectangular size. And that's pretty obvious too. And, frankly, I usually just do mashups of two photos together and I'll like montage them together like that. So we're not trying to fool you out there, but it is true that one image recently has been extended with the aid of AI, and you should see if you can figure out which one it is.
I guess the important take-home message is here. Just make sure you take pictures in landscape format for us, please.
Yeah,
it makes it so much easier.
Please take bigger pictures with good lighting. We won't have to resort to this trickery.
And last up for me, the Commodordion turns. I'll say that one more time. The Commodordion turns two C64s into a single instrument. What do you say about this? Oh, accordions have always sort of baffled me. My uncle used to have one, and he'd bring it to family gatherings and play polkas and stuff like that. It was really cool and all, having people dance around to polkas is always cool. But watching his fingers fly on the two different keyboards, the piano-like keyboard and then the bizarrely button-filled keyboard where you press one button and like 6 different buttons press. I've never understood that, how you could keep that all straight in your head and have your hands do 2 separate things. And I mean, music in general baffles me. What Linus Ackerson has done here is sort of recreate that complexity, that musical complexity, by taking 2 Commodore 64s and having them replace the 2 keyboard units, the keys and the piano keys and the push button keys. So I guess one is melody and one is chords, and connect them by a set of bellows, which are amusingly enough made from floppy disk envelopes. And the bellows actually do air pumping. I mean, they're not just decorative. The bellows are airtight enough that they actually pump air. And the sensor in this case is just a microphone that's placed near a little outlet in the bellows, so that when you blow on it, basically, amplitude of that sound indicates how fast or slow you're emptying the bellows. The rest of it is basic, SID stuff from the Commodore age. I tell you, when I was sitting there with my C64 in the 1980s and learning how to program and doing BBS stuff and all that, I never imagined that 2 of them could make an accordion. But here we are. He goes through quite a few, are they called licks on an accordion?
Yeah, I guess.
I guess he kind of shreds it up a little bit there, and he's just playing this thing effortlessly. I loved this. It just, there's a lot of great little details and fun stuff. It's very, very hacky. I mean, it's all breadboard and loose wires, and the power supplies have to be dangling off of it. And he's got a little, I think the only custom bit that he made was a PC board that basically spoofs the cassette tape interface at power on, so that it feeds the program to both of these C64s, and then from there you're basically off to the accordion races. It's great. It's you got to check it out. This one popped up in the tips. I saw it pop up. By the time I ran out to my office and tried to claim it, someone was already writing it up. I knew this one was gonna go fast. I think Robin got it. Yeah, Robin Carey got it. So congratulations for getting it before me. I loved it. I wish I had one Commodore 64 now, and so I could add another one and do something like this and maybe finally learn some music.
Linus Ackerson is absolutely one of my heroes, and I remember he made a demo for the AT Mega 8 chip, and it did audio and video all on just an Atmel AT Mega 8 back in the day. Craft, it's called. Go look it up. It is mind-blowing for what's coming off of this crappy little microcontroller. He's a genius. He's also a really brilliant piano player, and so that's part of this. And he'd written previously software called Quirtuoso from QWERTY Quirtuoso to play SID music live on the Commodore 64. So this accordion is really just 2 times his old 64-gun running Quirtuoso strapped together, plus that really fantastic bellows sensor arrangement that Dan mentioned, where it has a microphone that listens to the wheezing. I mean, like, this is just so fantastic, and that Linus is actually able to play it musically as well over the top is really just the icing on the cake.
Yeah, it was a little bit disturbing to see all those floppies being sacrificed, but he was quick to point out that no good floppies were harmed in the making of this accordion. And I just love the expression on his face, like, yeah, I'm playing an accordion made out of 2 C64s. What are you gonna do about it?
My first quick hack this week is a piece of DIY citizen science gear. Get clear insights into cloudy water with the Open Colorimeter by IO Rodeo. This thing measures the cloudiness of water by using a TSL 2591 optical color sensor and a bunch of LEDs to illuminate it at different wavelengths. This looks like not only an easy build, but it's very nicely done, very clearly documented. If you're new to doing your own turbidity measurements, he's actually got the protocols for how you would measure a bunch of different chemical concentrations in water. Depends on their differential absorption of a bunch of different wavelengths. Really cool project, really great introduction to an interesting piece of accessible science. Next up, brick technology with a crazy Lego build. Lego plays electronic drums. He had the brains from one of those electronic drum kits that uses piezo sensors underneath rubber pads to play E-drums. Here, he takes the 11 piezo sensors and he plays them with little Lego hammers. The beauty of this build is how simple it is and how much it reminds me of like a Lego Wintergatan type event, except with a long conveyor belt of Lego Technic strips with little nubbies in them to throw the Lego hammers and hit the piezos. Super device. And last up, render yourself invisible to AI with this adversarial sweater of doom. This is actually a few years old, this research from Tom Goldstein at the University of Maryland. It's basically a print that you can put on a sweater or sweatshirt or whatever, and it makes you look like you're part of the background to person recognizing computer vision routines. And so there's some really awesome demos of it recognizing all the people except for him in a room. You should go check it out. I just love adversarial AI stuff because neural networks really are kind of a black box, and this is a way of poking in at what's going on inside a little bit. Plus, the sweaters just look like these kind of horrible dreams of pumpkin fields. You know, Halloween.
Yeah. All right, my first choice is plumbing valves as heavy-duty analog inputs. This is by Alistair Atchison, who does escape rooms. The inputs and the switches and controls for those kind of places tend to get a little bit abused as people get a little over-exuberant in their zeal to escape before the timer goes off. What he's found is that using regular plumbing fixtures as a replacement for electronic controls like regular switches and stuff like that has worked very well, both mechanically in that they are more sturdy and also in the aesthetic of the escape room, because then you can set up sort of a scenario where you need to turn a valve or something like that. And the way he's actually sensing whether the valves are open or closed is simply with a light-dependent resistor on one end and an LED at the other end of the valve. And as the valve occludes the pipe, you can get a signal out of that. He's done it with ball valves, gate valves. It's kind of a cool concept and very hacky. Next up, sight and sound combine in this engaging synthesizer sculpture by Eric Brendel. He calls this creation Corwin Point, for reasons unknown, and refers to it as a generative dual voice analog synthesizer. And that says a lot right there, but looking at it, you can see that it's really just a sculpture first that also makes sound. So it's a visual sculpture. It's a circuit sculpture. It's got beautiful flying lead sort of open circuitry on the analog level. It's got tube in there for I think he said it was for overdrive. Plus it's got this tower of acrylic with light pipes snaking all over the place, and the light pipes sort of pulse and change colors in time to the beats that are generated by this autonomous synthesizer. It's really cool looking and very cool sounding. And in fact, I even said at some point, it seems like I'm hearing music from Logan's Run in the 1970s movie. It's very spooky and mysterious and constantly changing. I like the combination of light and sound and the general look of the thing. And last up, one of the worst keyboards ever, now an Arduino peripheral. This is by SL001. There's a certain group of people that grew up with the Sinclair ZX81. The ZX81 was a great starter computer. It got a lot of people going in personal computing, but that keyboard was just terrible. It was a membrane keyboard, and there's no way you could do touch typing. There's no way you could do anything approaching speed typing. It basically forced you into hunt and peck typing, and it must have been incredibly painful to try to program anything meaningful. We had them here in the States as the Timex 1000, I think it was, and I do remember playing with it a little bit. Now you can kind of recreate that keyboarding experience, that suboptimal keyboarding experience, by using this Arduino library that'll let you use the keyboard in your projects. I can see it being useful in some cases. It's got a lot of keys, and it could be handy, but I don't think you're going to want to sit down and actually write a program on it.
And that brings us to the can't miss articles. These are long form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I picked Lewin Day's Dancers Now Help Power Glasgow Nightclub. This is a little bit of an off-the-wall energy-saving attempt by a big nightclub in Glasgow to cool the place down and at the same time make use of the waste heat that the bodies of hundreds and hundreds of dancers must be giving off. It's a little bit of a crazy idea, but then the more that you think about it, if they have problems with the club being too hot when everybody's in there and then too cold later on, or if they need to heat hot water, or they surely could take that heat and do something good with it at the same time as they are cooling down, / air conditioning the place where the crazy hot dancers are. And so it's a little bit matrixy, I'll give you that, but the people are all there of their own free will dancing, and so you might ask how much heat could be produced by this, and we looked this up, and it's about 100 watts for an average person if you're standing still, but kind of 200 to 500 watts if you're doing heavy exercise. And then you put one of these giant clubs together where you have 1,000 people, and all of a sudden you're talking about 300 kilowatts of heat being put out into this hall. And of course that usually takes a huge air conditioning system. The tech angle here is actually surprisingly boring. They've got cold rocks deep 200 meters deep under the ground, and they are just heating that up / extracting the heat from the room and pumping it down there / taking the cold out of these rocks that are way under the earth and bringing it up to cool the people down. It's just like using a heat pump for your house. It's significantly more efficient than trying to cool it down any other way. And if you dig that far deep underground, you pretty much get a constant cold temperature, whatever it is, 53 degrees Fahrenheit, all year round. And so it's going to be useful for them probably for heating in the winter and cooling when there's people dancing in there. I think it's a great idea. I think the only thing that's a little bit gimmicky here is the idea of powering it off of, ravers. But, if you've got a source of excess heat, use it.
Yeah, I never really appreciated how much heat a single human body puts off until I used to work in the auditorium when I was in college, and it was a gigantic venue for 1,000+ people probably. We do concerts and shows and stuff in there. I mean, it was a cool, comfortable room. It's gigantic, with all the seats and everything. But you'd have a concert, and this wasn't even like a concert, like a rock concert or anything like that. This was just like a classical music concert, or recital, or something like that. So it's not with like ravers. people
right.
People are just sitting in their seats, but you would go up into the catwalk between the booth where I worked and the front of the stage. And it was unbearable up there. It was 37, 38 degrees, probably close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It got that way the entire time you were up there because they had to turn off the air circulators because they made too much noise and you would drown out the musicians. It was just unbearable to work up there and just to look down at the people and say, wow, you guys are doing this to me. When you realize how much heat just a sitting quiet person is putting off, and then add in the the energy of a rave or something like that. Yeah, I can see where this works, where that heat is available to do work. Why not?
There's a couple great comments in this comment section. One coming from Greg Eshelman. He writes in that the Mall of America in Minnesota, which is, I think, the largest mall in America or something, has air conditioning but no heating system. The body heat of all the shoppers is enough. Now, I've been in Minnesota in the wintertime, and I'm not 100% sure this is true. Somebody go fact check this one for me, because it is hella cold up there. On the other hand, it's a really big mall, and if they insulated it well and you multiply this by however many watts per person, it could possibly be. Minnesotans in parkas probably radiate significantly less heat than the average dancer. I mean, that's the gimmick with the parkas. Oh, the other comment I wanted to say something about was about people thinking that you should put piezo things in the floor. And I've always wanted to do that. That's always been like a dream of mine, except that the impedance matching problem there is just so hard. I've never figured out a good way to solve it. And that is that they put out very high voltage, but don't want to put out exceptionally large amounts of current. And so storing the power that you get from stomping on piezos has always been something that has stumped me anyway, every time I've tried to do it. If anyone knows about good piezo on the floor storing energy from people walking around or jumping around type projects, let me know.
Wasn't that also part of the solar roadways or some like self-powered roadways? I mean, obviously the solar roadways are supposed to be powered by the sun, but I thought there was some sort of energy harvesting with piezo devices of some sort that was supposed to be embedded in roadways or walkways or something like that to power, low voltage, like LED lights or something.
There's probably a much smarter way to do it than I've ever tried, which is, just getting a bunch of piezo discs, putting them under a piece of masonite/wood and stomping on them. Like, I don't know that I was necessarily doing it right either.
Now, is it going to be a thing if this becomes widespread where clubs are going to have to say you must have a high-calorie meal in the previous day before, or else you're just, you're not going to be worth it to us as a customer?
That's right. What's your metabolism check at the door?
Take your temperature and maybe size you up and say, oh, you look like a hottie. That's it.
Oh, boo.
We're only going to let in the hotties.
Oh, boo.
My pick for this week is a retro-tectacular article that Al Williams wrote, The Original Weather Channel. This may be a surprise. You may sit down here. I'm a weather geek, and I kind of have been all my life, and I always loved, just looking at the Weather Channel and watching it when the Weather Channel actually had weather on it, which doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Like MTV doesn't have music on it anymore. That constant stream of data, on local conditions and whether the temperature was going up or down or whatever was always fascinating to me. What this article is talking about is before the Weather Channel actually existed, there was the Weather Channel. I know. Wait, one more time. Before the official cable Weather Channel network existed, cable providers would buy a particular kind of system, and it was called the weather channel. And this device was basically an array of instruments, weather instruments, over which a camera would scan. And you used to have a constant feed going out to a channel that people could tune into and watch this little black and white display of the camera scanning over the wind speed and the direction and the temperature and the barometric pressure and things like that. And conveniently located at either end of the scan range were spaces for advertisements. This video that Al found, you can watch for 8 minutes. This old weather channel scanning back and forth across these instruments from Nashville, Tennessee. Apparently, sometime around Christmas in the 1960s, I'm gonna guess.
75.
Oh, really? It was that late? Okay. Going back and forth, there's their audio feed from an FM station nearby that had Christmas music on it, and then these little hand-drawn advertisements at each end of the scan were absolutely fascinating to look at. The device on one end actually had a slide projector that could be used to change those advertisements for every rotation of the camera. So that was kind of cool. I guess this device went through several iterations. Instead of the original one had this semicircular control panel that looks like something out of Fallout, with the camera on a motorized pan mount carrying its own lights so that the lighting was always consistent as it scanned across these instruments, which were just analog instruments with glass faces. So there's some glare and there's some parallax and all that, but it's perfectly readable. You can see what's going on. And then when it gets to the end of the scan, that's where the advertisements are. The company that put these out was called Telemation. They came up with several different designs. First, it was the scanning camera. The next one was a stationary camera with a mirror that scanned back and forth so you could see the instruments and the advertisements. This thing kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller as the years went by until it became no longer economical to do this kind of thing, because we had other ways of getting, Chiron sort of things to get weather data on the screen. I can remember the sort of Chiron text that was put up on a screen, and then it'd have the forecast in the middle and the current conditions would just kind of scroll by down below. We did an article about that. Someone recreated that kind of weather feed just for nostalgia purposes. Put a link to that in the notes. But this thing did this mechanically right up until there was no longer any point for it. A great look at this old technology and just the cleverness of getting something done with what you had available at the time.
I guess I didn't know this was a thing, but it's absolutely fantastic. And those handwritten ads on the corners are so super. The one asking for people to come join Mrs. Art Smith in caroling. Call her any day, except call her any day from this time to this time, except December 10th. Like, because she's got to go to the grocery store or something. Like, this does kind of harken back to a different era, and I think that's also pretty lovely. I was looking for a couple more of these to see if we could find them. Had a hard time, so I don't even know how Al scrounged up this video. But it's a sweet piece of forgotten technology. Makes me want to set up my own pirate TV show where I just have a little scanner that goes across my room and looks at a bunch of different gauges or something. That'd be so funny to set one of these up.
Yeah, one person in the comments said that he'd like to take the Unreal Engine and spend time making up some displays and then put a camera on to pan across them, and then actually, have those displays linked to, at some API someplace. I Mark Topham, do it and let us know, because that's gorgeous. I'd love it. And, and he says apply some nostalgic filtering and make it seem very 1960s. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Throw in the Super Marionation Weatherman. Do it, and tell us all about it.
Hackaday.com/feed gets you our RSS feed. Just saying.
Yeah, yep, there you go. Oh, man, that would be great, wouldn't it?
That's it for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you want to find the links, they're all in the show notes over at hackaday.com/podcast. And if you have any great tips for us, write us at the tips line, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
This is episode 1. Yeah. I'm going to cry.
All right, what do I want to say about this one?
It's not assistance. It's not...
Okay. Can't even get the first frickin' word out.
If you're new to doing your own that's an L, I think. Let me just...
Is it L or a...
Yeah, let me get a serif font and check it out. Oh, no, I got one more even. Man, no, I don't. Oh, yeah, I do.
It's enough of that.